Hi, my name is Meng and welcome to section 44 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to detect the tap duration from the long press gesture and turn that into a progress animation. First of all, we need to duplicate this circle button, and obviously we don't want to recode everything. So what we can do here is command click on circle button, jump to definition, and command click on circle button again. And here you're gonna click on fold. So this is simply going to fold all the code inside the curly braces. This is very useful for organizing your code, especially when you have very long code where you have curly braces and you don't know where it ends. So what you can do is just command click on the curly braces or the component or the view, and then you can just fold that part. And that allows you to keep it short and easy to scan. Now, if you want to show it again, just double click on it and it's going to show all the content. At this point, we're just gonna select all of this component called circle button, and we're gonna copy it, we're gonna paste it right underneath. Then we're going to rename the button. We're gonna call it pay button. And finally, we're gonna scroll back to the top and we're gonna include that new button. So pay button, parentheses. Perfect. So I'm gonna jump back to that pay button and we can start customizing it. The first thing we're gonna need to do is to change the state that is called tap. We're gonna change that into a gesture state instead. Then I'm gonna scroll down to the gesture and I'm going to remove the unchanged event because we're gonna use a different one. The one we're gonna use is called .updating. And you can press enter using the auto completion. And for the state, we're gonna use $tap. Then press tab, and for the body, we can just delete it. And after the parentheses, we're gonna do curly braces, enter. And right after the curly brace, we're gonna receive a bunch of values from this event. The first one is going to be called current state, comma. Then the next one is gesture state, but do not use the auto completion. Make sure it's camel case because this is a custom variable name that we declare to match the values that we're getting. Next, type comma and then transaction in at the end. Then in the next line, we're gonna type gesture state and make sure to use the one with the camel case again is equal to current state. So now we can resume and let's take a look at what's different. So this one, when I tap, it just expands and go back right away. But here, the longer that I tap, the more that it expands and it stays expanded until the long press gesture kicks in. So why is this important? Well, thanks to that, the longer that I'm tapping, the more that it expands, which means that we can use that to create a progress animation. So let's do that. First of all, we're gonna go to the frame and we're gonna set it to 120 by 120. Inside the Z stack, we're going to remove the images and set a new image, parentheses, and we're gonna use an image from the assets catalog. But first, we're gonna have to go to the assets catalog and then make sure that you have downloaded the new source files. And I'm gonna go to assets. You're gonna find fingerprint.pdf and fingerprint-2.pdf. So I'm gonna drag and drop those two. If you already have these two assets, you don't need to do this step. So we're gonna go back to buttons.swift. I'm going to close the navigator and resume. So for the image within the double quotes, we're gonna write fingerprint. And then I'm gonna create a clip animation. So first of all, I'm gonna need to bring the second fingerprint image. So image parentheses double quotes fingerprint-2. And for the second image, which is purple, I'm gonna set a clip shape. So clip shape, I'm gonna use a rectangle parentheses. So what this means is that I'm using a mask so I can reduce the size of this rectangle to hide a portion, or I can use offset. Offset might be a little bit easier, so I'm gonna do .offset and I'm gonna change the Y position. So let's say I set it to 50. You can see that it's completely hidden. If I set it to 40, it's gonna show a little bit and the lower the number, the more I'm going to show that purple image. Let's set this to 0 and animate this. Before 0, I'm going to type tap ? So 0 means show the entire thing. Otherwise, set it to 50, which means hide the entire thing. Let's give this a test. I'm going to play the preview, then tap it, and voila, you can see that I have my progress animation. The bounce animation might be a little bit of a problem, so you can definitely change the animation on this specific element. So we can put .animation.easeIn out. Like this, I'm not gonna have that bounce back anymore. Okay, so next, what if when I long press, it's going to switch to a check mark? So let's create the check mark. So image, parentheses, system name. We're gonna use SF symbols is checkmark.circle.fill. Let's make it bigger. So .font, .system, size, weight, and design. The size is going to be 44, weight.light, and for the design we can just delete it. We can color this, so foreground color, color parentheses, color lit, and we can choose any color we want. I'm gonna choose the purple one. So let's start with a simple opacity animation. So we're gonna do for the first image, which is fingerprint, .opacity, press, ? We're gonna set it to 0, otherwise 1. Then for the third image, which is the check mark, I'm gonna set .opacity, press, ? Set it to 1, otherwise 0. So you can see a little fade in, fade out. But we do have a bit of a problem with the fingerprint too, so we should also apply the same opacity animation. It's a little bit better. Another thing that I like to do is the scale effect. So I'm gonna add .scale effect, then type inside the parentheses press ? I'm gonna set it to 0, otherwise 1. And let's copy and paste the same for fingerprint 2, as well as the third image, but I'm going to reverse the number. So 1, otherwise 0. So now you're gonna see a very neat scale effect. Let's have some more fun and let's add a ring animation. So I'm gonna scroll down a little bit, and right after clip shape, I'm going to set .overlay. Inside the overlay, I'm going to set my indentation. First of all, I'm going to set a circle, parentheses. Let's set the trim first. So .trim. Let's use the option with the from and to values. From is going to be, let's say, 0.3 to 1. As we've learned previously, this is the Apple Watch ring, and we are basically trimming a portion of the circle. And it looks weird right now, but if we only use a stroke, it's gonna look better. So after trim, we're gonna type .stroke, and we're gonna select the one that says content and stroke style. For the content, let's set a color for now. So let's say blue, color.blue. And for the style, we're gonna set stroke style, parentheses, and we're gonna use all of these options. For the line width, we're gonna set it to 5, the line cap, .round, and for the rest of the options, I'm just gonna delete them because I don't need them. So this is looking pretty good. I'm just gonna change the frame. I'm gonna set it to width 88, height 88. And I'm gonna make sure that we're gonna start at the same position as the Apple Watch ring. So I'm gonna do a little bit of rotation and 3D rotation. So let's do .rotation effect. Set angle, parentheses, degrees, set it to 90. Then .rotation 3D. And I'm gonna use the first option. Again, angle, parentheses, degrees, gonna set it to 180. For the axes, I'm gonna set the X axis to 1, Y to 0, and Z to 0. Let me just fix the indentation. And now you can see that it's starting from the top and clockwise, finishing like this. Okay, so now we can do the animation. Right now we're going to use the from value, set it to nothing to a fill, but the way that this value works is that the lower the number, the more complete it is. So I'm going to type tap question mark, set it to 0.001, otherwise 1. So by default, there's no progress, and at the end of the animation, I'm using a very small number to set my completion. And if I test this, you can see that it works. Likewise, we have a bit of a bouncing animation, so we can remove that by adding the animation modifier, and we can use .easeIn out as well. So now it doesn't bounce anymore. Alright, so before we finish, I just want to add a little bit of a gradient and a little bit of drop shadow. So I'm going to go to the stroke, and instead of the color blue, I'm going to use a linear gradient. So let me just delete color.blue, and I'm going to summon linear gradient. And for this, I'm going to set the starting point to .top leading and the end point .bottom trailing. For the colors, I'm going to use color literals, so color parentheses color lit. Let me use purple. And for the second color, I'm going to do the same, so color parentheses color lit here, and set it to a slightly lighter tone of purple. Then I'm going to add the drop shadow, so right after rotation 3D effect, I'm going to add .shadow with the color. Again, color parentheses color lit, and I'm gonna set purple. The radius is going to be 5x3 y3. Then I'm gonna set the opacity of my color, so opacity, set it to 0.3. So that's it. This is what I have so far. I think this looks pretty awesome. I hope you enjoyed this section, and I really can't wait to see what kind of amazing concepts you're going to create with this technique. I think you're going to enjoy the next session as well, because we're gonna do haptic feedback. That's what's missing in all of this. It's gonna make your buttons so tactile and respond with different strength of haptic feedback. So I'll see you in the next session. Welcome to section 45 of my SwiftUI course. In this section, we're going to learn how to add haptic feedback to your buttons or interactions. We're going to learn how to apply different strength and even presets such as error and success. By the way, haptic feedback will only work on your device. It's not going to work on your simulator or on the preview, so I recommend that you put the app on your device. Since you want to use this haptic feedback pretty much everywhere in the app, we're going to create a function that is widely available. So I'm going to do that right before the struck buttons. Let's type func haptic parentheses curly braces. Now to create a haptic feedback, all you need to do is just one line of code. And that's going to be UI notification feedback generator parentheses dot notification occurred, and within the parentheses, dot, and here you have a bunch of options. So error, success, and warning. So let's pick success. And that's it. If you run this function, which is simply going to run this line of code, it's going to apply that haptic feedback. So we could go to any button, and let's say we're going to go to gesture. We have the small tab here, and we can essentially call the haptic function parentheses. I definitely encourage that you test this on your device. You're going to see a little double pulse for success and a few variations with error as well as warning. And to make it easier, we can even make it customizable from here, so we can just pass the success value. So to know what kind of value, we're going to have to option click here. You're going to see that it's UI notification feedback generator feedback type. So we're going to have to pass a type colon UI notification feedback generator dot feedback type. Using the value type, then we can put it inside the parentheses. So type. Like this, I'm going to scroll back to my gesture. I just need to do dot, and then I can find error, success, warning. So if you want to have something a little bit more subtle, so a single pulse, we're going to use something called impact. Let's create a new function. So func impact parentheses curly braces. So just like UI notification, we're just going to have a single line of code. So we're going to type UI impact feedback generator parentheses. And here for this one is going to have a style. So we're going to select the autocompletion with style. And here we can select how heavy we want the pulse to be. So for example, I can select heavy. And then just like the UI notification, I'm going to activate it. So right after the parentheses, dot impact occurred. For impact, I can also pass the value. So I can make this function customizable. And I can option click on style to find that this is of type UI impact feedback generator dot feedback style. So I'm gonna pass that in the parentheses. It's going to be style colon UI impact feedback generator dot feedback style. So using this style variable, I'm just gonna replace dot heavy with that style. Now you don't have to create a function for this. You could have just put this long code in your gesture, but sometimes with long code it can be confusing, which is why I create functions for those. And also, if you don't want to make these functions available widely in your app, you can just move it right before var body. A neat trick that I found is that if you're confused as to where you put the functions in your view, you can command click on the component and then click on add method. It's going to add right place for you. So this function will only be available for the buttons view. It's not going to be available anywhere else. But since I wanted to make these available across all my buttons, that's why I put it outside of the component. Now for the impact, I can just run it anywhere, let's say for the gesture as well. So I can move haptic to unended, which means when the long press is successful, and I can use impact for a short tap. So this is going to be the single pulse, and I can select heavy, light, medium, rigid, or soft. So that's it. This is a short session, and definitely try to make it work on your device because it's a lot of fun to see this in action. In the next session, we're going to learn how to create a login screen. And from there, we're going to start using forms, keyboard interactions, Firebase, persistent login. It's going to be a long series, and I can't wait to teach you all the new techniques. So see you then. Hi, and welcome to section 46 of my SwiftUI course. This is going to be a long series where we're going to build a login screen from the ground up, including variable font size, animations in the background, 3D parallax, a form, connection to Firebase, Lottie animations, including how to install CocoaPods, which allows you to have access to even more libraries. Because at this point in time, most libraries are not yet supporting the Swift Package Manager, and Firebase is one of them. And then we're going to learn environment objects and user defaults so that we can have persistent login even after we close the app. As you can imagine, there are a lot of new topics to learn here, so let's get started. Back to Xcode, I'm going to open the navigator and then right-click on homeview.swift. I'm going to click New File, SwiftUI View. I'm going to call this Login View. Let me hide the navigator and scroll to the top, and I'm going to start the preview. So the first thing I want to show you is how to create a font size based on the width of the container. First things first, I'm going to change the text. Let's put learn, design, and code, period, from scratch, period. Let's make this font bigger, so .font, .system. We're going to use, let's say, 34, font weight .bold, and we can remove the design part. From here, you can imagine that depending on the font size or the frame, the text might become longer or shorter. So for the iPad, for example, that can be a problem because you want to limit the amount of characters per line. And also if you're dealing with an iPhone SE resolution, which is 320, and sometimes you want to be able to make the font size smaller to fit the smaller layout. Just like in HTML, one little trick when you want to have, let's say, a second line starting from, you can use a BR in HTML. But for SwiftUI, right before the F, you can do /n. So that's going to create a new line automatically. And we can remove this extra space. So what about the variable font size? Well, we're going to need to use Geometry Reader. So I'm going to command click the text. Let's just put it in a VStack for now. And let's replace the VStack by Geometry Reader. And we're going to get a value back called geometry in. And then for that Geometry Reader, we're going to set a frame. The frame is going to have a max width of .infinity. So this is going to make sure that we're taking the full width of the screen. And then we're going to use the value that we're getting back from Geometry Reader, and we're going to replace the size of our font using that. So let's type geometry.size.width. And now you're going to find ellipses, that's the triple dots, and that's because our font size is way too big. If you think about it, the font size right now is 375 because it's taking the width of the screen. So what you can do here is to use a formula, for example, divided by 10, which means that now the font size is going to be 37.5. And that's a little bit too much since our goal is about 34. But let's add a little bit of padding to the left and right. So .padding, .horizontal, comma, we're gonna set to 16. So that will essentially give us 375 minus 32, which is 343. And that's almost exactly what we want. Now, if we didn't do this variable font size, this big title wouldn't fit in a resolution of 320 width. But thanks to the variable font size, let's set this to 320. You can see that the font size has adjusted to the width. But the problem is when you have an iPad and let's say the width is 1024, well, the font size is going to become way too big. So what you can do is to set the max width to 325, which is the ideal maximum font size, and that will solve your problem. In fact, we can give it a test. So .preview device. Let's set it to iPhone SE, and voila, that fits. And now let's set it to iPad Air 2, and you can see that the title does not increase further. So let me just go back by commenting on this, and now we can do the rest of the layout. First of all, let's put the Geometry Reader inside a VStack. I'm gonna add a second text. I'm gonna take this text here. Let's type text, parentheses, quotes, and paste that text. The Geometry Reader seems to be pushing our second text way too much, so we can set a max height to 100. let's style the second text to .font .subheadline, and let's give it a width using the frame. Let's set the width to 250 since we don't want our text to drag too long. What I'm gonna do here is to make the two texts centered so that it looks better together. So I'm gonna use .multi-line alignment .center, and I can just copy this modifier and paste it to the title as well. Cool, so now let's take care of the background. So command click this and get the hex value. So I'm gonna go to the VStack, I'm gonna set a frame. The height is going to be 477, and I'm going to add another frame with the max width to .infinity. So now we can set the background color, so .background and color parentheses color lit. Double click on the color. We're gonna go to other, the RGB sliders, so that we can have access to the hex color. Paste that hex value, enter. Just like in the design, we're gonna use a background image. So to do that, we're gonna use another background modifier before the first one, and I'm gonna type image parentheses. Let's use image literal, so UI image camel case, image lit, and select the image that we want. In this case, I'm gonna use card 3, so this one. Another thing that you might not know is that the background modifier, you can add a comma and set the alignment to .bottom. So let's take a look at the layout again, and you can see that the image is at the bottom, but these texts are not centered. So what we can do is to add a spacer to push everything to the top and add a padding from the top. Back to Xcode, I'm going to add a spacer parentheses. So that's going to push everything to the top. And then I can add .padding .top of 100. This padding is applying to the VStack. Then I'm gonna make the title white, so I'm gonna add a new modifier right after font. I'm gonna put .foreground color, and it's going to be .white. Now I just realized that I applied the multi-line text alignment to the geometry reader instead of the text, which is curious because in SwiftUI, just like in CSS, if you apply it to the parent container, it's going to apply to the children. So for example, I can cut this multi-line here from the geometry reader and put that to the VStack, and it's going to apply to both text, and I don't need to have this one for the second text. Alright, so let's do the rest of the layout. After background for the VStack, I'm going to add .clip shape and set a rounded rectangle, parentheses, set the corner radius and style. I'm gonna set it to 30 and style continuous. Then I'm gonna take care of the different backgrounds. So we have the cover that we're doing right now, and we have the black background and the off-white background. So what I'm gonna do is command click on the VStack, put that inside a VStack, change the parent VStack to a ZStack, and I'm going to add the black background first. So color.black. And for this color, I want to ignore save area .all. Then I'm gonna add another background, this time color parentheses background 2. I'm going to set .edge ignore save area as well, and set .bottom instead of .all. Now all that's left is to move our cover to the very top. So there's a neat trick with a ZStack, is to set alignment to .top. Now just like VStack, this will only work to align the elements inside against each other. So you can't set a frame and expect the elements to align within that frame. You have to make sure that one of the elements are taking the full height, and then you can align the elements against each other. Alright, so we're almost done. We can apply the same corner radius for background 2. So .clip shape, rounded rectangle parentheses, corner radius and style, I'm gonna set it to 30 dot continuous. And then one final thing is to add these blobs in the background. So I'm gonna scroll down and go to the background modifier with the image. I'm gonna add a new one before that, so dot background. Let's start with the first blob. So image, parentheses, UI image camel case, image lit, and I'm gonna select the blob. Let me indent this. I'm going to position it, so using offset, set X to -150, Y to -200. Then I'm going to use a blend mode, so dot blend mode. Then I'm going to use dot plus darker. Let me add a second one, so I'm going to put this inside a Z stack. So embed in V stack first, change to Z stack. I'm going to copy the first image with its modifiers. And for the second one, I'm going to set to X -200, Y -250. And for the blend mode, it's going to be overlay. So let me just fix the indentation. And there you go. We're ready to animate this. And we're going to apply a rotation looping animation for the blobs, and also a really cool 3D parallax effect using gesture for the whole cover. So don't miss this in the next session. I'll see you then. Hi, and welcome back to section 47 of my SwiftUI course. We're going to start with the rotations of these blobs, and they will be looping forever. First of all, let's set the animation state. So before var body, we're going to set state var show is equal to false by default. Then we're going to scroll down a little bit to find the background modifier where we have two images. Let me just resume the preview. And right before blend mode, I'm going to add dot rotation effect. Within the parentheses, angle, parentheses degrees, we're going to set it to 90 by default. Then we're going to set the animation by typing show question mark 360, otherwise 90. Let me add the event, and we're going to use dot on appear. Instead of parentheses, we're going to use curly braces. Self dot show is equal to true. What this means is that this animation will start when this blob appears on screen. And then we're going to add the animation before on appear, so dot animation, dot linear, and we're going to select the one with the duration, so we can set to 1 second, and make sure to play your preview. And you can see that the animation is rather fast and it stops. So what we want to do is to make it loop. So we're going to have to set the value, so animation, and then we can add more properties such as dot repeat forever. But you can see that by default it's reversing. So what we need to do is within the parentheses, we're going to do auto reverse to false. Now this is looping, but it seems to be skipping about 90 degrees, and that's because we have an offset. It's animating from 90 to 360 and then 90 again to 360 again. So what you can do when you have an offset is to add that offset number. So you can see now that the rotation is working properly, and we just need to make it slower. So we're going to set it to a duration of 120, and that's much better. So let's do the same for the second image. So before blend mode, dot rotation effect, angle parentheses, degrees, and I'm going to set it to 0 by default. Then before the 0, I'm going to set show question mark 360, otherwise 0. Let's also add the animation. So right after blend mode, dot animation, then type the animation value with a capital A, dot linear with the duration. We're going to set this one to 100, and we're going to add another property for repeat forever using auto reverse false. So now you can see that our blobs are rotating forever, and this is useful for animations like a loading, for example. One cool thing you can do with rotation effect is to add the anchor. So right after angle, comma, anchor, we can set it to top or bottom. I'm going to set this to leading, and basically it's going to anchor the rotation. So as the center is going to be leading, which is the left. It's much easier to test if you set it to duration of 1 second. You're gonna see that it's rotating against the left. So now let me put it back to 120 and we're gonna move on to the 3D parallax. At the very top of the document, I'm going to set new states. The first one, state var view state is equal to cg size dot 0 by default. Then I'm gonna set the boolean, so state var is dragging is equal to false. By the way, animation can be a bit intensive for the CPU, so what you can do is to stop the preview for now. Then we're gonna scroll down and add a gesture to our VStack. At the bottom, right after clip shape, I'm going to add dot gesture. The gesture is going to be drag gesture, parentheses. Let me put this in its own line. And then I'm going to add dot unchanged, curly braces. Don't forget the value in. And then we're going to store the position of the drag in our view state. So self.viewState is equal to value.translation. While we're here, let's also add dot unended. So when we are releasing, curly braces value in, then we're going to reset the position. So self.viewState is equal to dot 0. After this, we're going to add a new modifier for rotation 3D effect right before the gesture modifier. For the angle, I'm going to set it to 5. So angle parentheses degrees 5. Now what's going to happen here is that we're going to connect the view state X and Y position to the axes. So for X, I'm going to set the view state dot width. And for Y, I'm going to set view state dot height. For Z, I'm going to set to 0. And let's play this. And voila, we have our 3D parallax effect based on the drag gesture. You can definitely make this more dynamic. So let's say at 50, it's going to be really intense. But I'm going to put it back to 5 and I want to add a little scale effect when this is happening. I already set up my isDragging state, which is a boolean, and I'm going to activate that during unchange. Let's go to a new line and add self.isDragging is equal to true, and unended to a new line self.isDragging is equal to false. Let me apply the animation. First of all, let me just fix this indentation, and right after rotation 3D effect, I'm going to add dot scale effect and set isDragging question mark, set it to 0.9, otherwise set it to 1. So now what's going to happen is that while I drag, it's going to scale down, but I might want to have a transition going on. So I'm going to add an animation modifier. So dot animation, I'm going to set dot timing curve set to 0.2, 0.8, 0.2, and then 1. And we can also set the duration. So right after this, add a comma, duration, colon, 0.8. Now when you drag, you can see that there's a bit of transition going on, but we do have a bit of a skip frame at the end. So one solution that I found was to put the scale effect and the animation before the rotation 3D effect. So if you do this, it's going to be smooth. It's pretty cool. Now the parallax can be extended, which means that we can apply it to the text and the images as well. For example, I can go to the title and the text. For the title, I'm just going to use the geometry reader and add dot offset. So I can set the X to view state dot width, Y view state dot height. If I do this, you're going to see that the text is moving as well, but it's moving way too fast. So what I can do is to divide the number by, let's say, 15 for both. and it's gonna go much slower now. But it has a little bit of 3D parallax effect, which is really cool. And now I can apply the same offset modifier to the text. And I can make the text to be slower by dividing by 20 instead of 15. So now you can see that they're moving at different pace. Let's do the same for the background image. So I'm gonna scroll down. The background is right after the color and it says image. It has also the alignment to the bottom. So I need to make sure that I'm applying to the right thing. And in this case, I need to apply to the image. So let me just set the indentation. This is my image. I'm just gonna add the offset to the image and I can divide by 25. And voila, we have the image that's also moving and the title and the text. It creates this really interesting 3D parallax effect. So that's what I wanted to show you today. I hope you had a lot of fun. Of course, try and play with this. There's so many possibilities. In the next session, I'm going to show you how to create a form with a text field and a password and the layout that goes with it. See you in the next session. Hi and welcome to section 48 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to create a form using text fields with an email and password. So the first thing we're going to do is to make this a little bit more clean so that we can create the form on top of it. The first thing that we can do here is to set this cover to be a component. So I'm going to command click on it and extract subview. It's going to be called cover view. Then I have to also move the states. So selecting all of these, cut and paste it to cover view. Now let's go back to the top and we're going to create two states. In login view, before the body, I'm going to create a state var email is equal to nothing. So this is going to be a string, and the same for the password. State var password is equal to nothing. So with a lot of forms, the data has to be a state because it's dynamic. Let's go ahead and right after cover view, we're going to create a text field. We can use Command Shift and L to summon a bunch of controls. So you definitely have a bunch of them, and this can range from date picker, we have the picker as well, the slider, the stepper. In this case, we're going to use text field. As you can see here, the first value is going to be the placeholder text. And so we're just going to put double quotes, your email. And then for the text, since this is dynamic and can change based on what the user has entered, we're going to use $email. Let me resume this. We can also play. And you can already see that I can enter information here. Because running an animation in the background like this can be a little bit demanding on the CPU while you code, sometimes what you can do is just to disable the animation for now. So I'm going to go to the Z stack inside the background modifier, and for the animation modifier, I'm just going to do command / to disable them. If you see a little bit of transition going on, that's because we're inheriting from the animation from the parent container. And a quick fix for this is to use .animation nil, which means no animation at all. So I'm going to copy and paste this for the other image as well. I could have put it in the Z stack as well, but sometimes when I put in the parent container, I can forget about it. So back to our text field at the very top. Let me put this inside a container and then we can style it. So command click on text field, embed in VStack. The final layout is going to look like this. So the VStack is the container, and then we're going to have to put the text field inside an HTag so that we can put the icon on the left side. And this small line here is a simple divider. So for the VStack, I'm going to set dot frame height 136. I'm going to use the full width of the screen, so I'm going to have to use dot frame max width dot infinity. Since we have interesting and colorful backgrounds, we can use the blur view, which makes the front element more contextual and easy to read. So let's set dot background, and we're going to use blur view. This is the component that we created earlier, parentheses, using style dot system material. Now let me set the rounded corners, so dot clip shape. We're going to use a rounded rectangle, parentheses, the corner radius with style, and it's going to be 30 dot continuous. Let's add a little bit of drop shadow, so dot shadow with more options. We're going to use dot black, and the radius is going to be 20, x0, y 20. Since this drop shadow is way too strong, I'm going to add the value type so that I can add opacity at the end as well. So 0.15. And after you add all of that styling, we can add the padding to the left and the right so that the padding is not going to be styled. So let's do dot padding, and we're going to set it to dot horizontal. Then finally, we're going to adjust the offset. So dot offset, use the Y position, set it to 460. All right, so back to our text field. A lot of people actually ask, what about styling? What can I do to make this as customizable as possible? Well, the truth is, this is almost exactly like a text element. You can customize the font, the padding, the background, the size, but if you want to go further than that, you might want to style outside of it. So using, let's say, the VStack container, and then you want to make your text field to have a transparent background so that it can sit on top of any type of background. So let's start with the customizations. First, it's important to know that you can customize the keyboard type. So keyboard type, and then inside the parentheses dot, you have email address, numpad, etc. So we're going to use email address. Then we can set the font, so dot font dot subheadline. If you want to make your text in caps, you definitely want to set dot uppercase parentheses. And this is exactly the same as a text element with a string inside. Next, you want to set the padding, so dot padding. And let's say you just want to have the padding from the left. We're going to do dot leading inside the parentheses. And if you want to set the height, we're going to set the frame with a height of 44. Now keep in mind that the padding here or the frame is not going to make that space interactive. Only the minimum size of the text field is going to be tappable. Let me explain what I mean. So if I set a dot background color dot orange, this is the zone that is tappable. If I set that same background with another color with the padding or frame, set it to blue, this part is not tappable to initiate the keyboard. So let me play that just to show you. Now if I tap on the blue zone, it's not going to initiate the keyboard, but if I tap on the orange zone, it will. I believe that this is an issue with SwiftUI that will be solved in the future, but for now, if you are creating a custom text field, then you have to take this into consideration. Now, if you're not using a custom text field, you can always set dot text field style. And here you're gonna have the option to have different styles. I'm gonna press enter, and I have the options for rounded border, default, or plain. I'm gonna use rounded border text field style, parentheses. And you can see if I remove the orange background as well as the blue background, this is a fairly common style that has pretty decent padding, which means that I can tap inside this space and it's going to initiate the keyboard. But for the time being, I'm just gonna comment this and use a custom style. Then I'm gonna add an icon to the left, which means that I'm going to command click on text field, embed in HTag. So let's create the icon right before the text field, image, parentheses, system name, quotes, person.crop.circle.fill. Then let me set the foreground color. Then I'm gonna type color, parentheses, color lit, and set a hex color value, which is going to be light blue. Let's now set the frame. So dot frame, parentheses, width 44, height 44. I'm gonna set the background. So background color dot white. Then we can set the clip shape, rounded rectangle, parentheses, corner radius 16, dot continuous, dot shadow, color dot black, dot opacity to 0.15, the radius 505. Then I can add a padding from the left, so padding dot leading. This is going to be of 16. Now I'm going to create a second field. So what I can do here is just to copy the whole H stack and paste it right after. For some reason the indentation gets wrong, so we can just select the whole thing and Control I to fix this. Alright, so for the second one, I'm gonna change the icon. It's going to be log.fill. Then I'm gonna set a password field instead. And to do that, I have to replace text field with secure field instead. The placeholder is going to be password, and we can change the keyboard type to default instead of email. Let's not forget to change from email to $password for the state. So the difference between the two is that password is going to hide whatever you type, and that's exactly what we want. And finally, before the H stack, I'm going to add a divider between the two fields. We can use the divider parentheses, and then you're gonna see this tiny line between the two. If you want to make your line start at the same distance as your text, you can add a padding. So let's type dot padding, and we're gonna set inside the parentheses dot leading, comma 80. So that's it for today. In the next session, we're going to learn how to deal with the keyboard interactions, how to show alerts, how to center the screen when you tap on the text field, or dismiss when you tap outside of the text field. So I'll see you in the next session. Welcome to section 49 of the SwiftUI course. Today we're going to take care of the keyboard interactions for the login view. This is the layout that we have so far, and it's missing a few key elements, such as when you tap on the field, you're supposed to center the layout. Also, one of the expected behavior is when you tap outside of the field, you're supposed to dismiss the keyboard. Right now, you have to tap on the return key to get back. So back to Xcode from the login view. If you want to test the keyboard, you have no choice but to build and play using the simulator. And make sure to go to Scene Delegate to set the initial screen to login view. So back to login view. If you want to play to your simulator, just do Command and R, and it's going to launch that. So let me hide the navigator. So now I'm going to set a state to know if the user is focused on the text field or not. I'm gonna set a third state. So state var is focus is equal to false by default. Then I'm gonna scroll down to find the text field. For the text field, I'm going to add a new modifier called onTapGesture. And this is where I'm going to set the boolean to true. So self.isFocus is equal to true. Now my goal is to center the entire layout. So let me scroll back up. I have a Z stack right now, and what I want to do is to move the entire content of the Z stack except for the black color. Otherwise, we're gonna see a white color. So I'm gonna need to command click on the Z stack and embed in V stack, change that to a Z stack, and then we're gonna move the black color at the beginning of the Z stack parent container. So just to give you an idea, we're gonna scroll down, and at the fourth ending braces, so 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to set dot offset. Using the Y position, we're gonna set it to -300. Make sure to resume your preview, and now you're gonna see that we're keeping the black background and we're moving the whole layout. Now let's set the state. So right before -300, I'm going to set is focus -300, otherwise 0. So don't change anything by default. Let's play the preview. And now when I tap on your email, it's going to send to the screen. We just need to add a transition and also a way to tap outside so that we can go back. Let me do the animation. So dot animation dot ease in out. Then I'm gonna add a on tap gesture as well. Then we're gonna type self.isFocus is equal to false. Now if I tap on the email field, it's going to center. And if I tap outside, it's gonna come back. We just need a way to dismiss the keyboard, otherwise we cannot get out of this. So let me go and create a function. So right before body, at the top of the view, I'm going to write func height keyboard, parentheses, curly braces, then UI application dot shared dot send action. Use the first option in the auto completion, and then for the selector, it's going to be hashtag selector, parentheses. Inside the parentheses is going to be UI responder dot resign first responder. Then the value for 2 is going to be nil from nil for nil. Now that we have this function, I'm gonna go back to my untap gesture at the end of the Z stack, and in a new line, I'm going to call self.hide keyboard parentheses. Now I'm gonna have to resume again. There's a shortcut, by the way, which is Option, Command, and P, and it's going to do that. So now when you tap on email, it's going to summon the keyboard. You don't see it in the preview, you have to see it in the simulator. But let's say that we see it here. And now when I tap outside, it also hides the keyboard. Let's also apply the interaction on the password. So I'm gonna go to secure field, and right after frame dot untap gesture, self.isFocus is equal to true. Before we move on, there's just one issue that we have introduced since we added this animation line here. So what you're gonna notice here is when you come back from this transition, it seems to have a bit of a lag. If you disable this, it's fine. So one thing you can do is you can set a condition. So is focus question mark, then run the animation, otherwise set to nil. So this is another cool trick which allows you to enable or disable an animation based on a state. So now you're gonna see that it's fine. Alright, so now we're gonna do the alert, but first of all, we're gonna need the login button. I'm going to insert a button at the end of my Z stack. So right after offset 460, I'm going to summon a button. Let me set the action to empty. The text is going to be log in plus indentation. Now you can see the button right here. I'm just going to set my H tag. So embed in H tag. And before the H tag, I'm going to set the text. So text parentheses forgot password question mark. And between the two, I'm going to set a spacer. For the H tag container, I'm going to move it at the bottom of the layout. So let's add modifiers to this H tag. Starting with .frame parentheses max width to infinity, max height to .infinity. This is going to ensure that we're taking the maximum space possible. And right now it's centered, but what we can do is to align that. So add comma alignment to .bottom. So now it's at the bottom. We can also add some extra padding, so dot padding parentheses. Alright, so let's style the text first. So dot font subheadline. Then for the text, I'm going to set dot foreground color to dot black. I'm going to style the button as well. Dot padding, set it to 12 on all sides. Let's add another padding on top of that. So dot padding, and I'm gonna set to dot horizontal, comma 30. For the background, I'm gonna use a hex color. So dot background color parentheses color lit, and I'm going to set from the color picker using the hex color code. It's going to be a bright blue. Next, we're gonna use dot clip shape rounded rectangle parentheses corner radius is going to be 20 dot continuous. Finally, the shadow, so dot shadow. The color is going to be the same as the background, so I can just copy and paste that. And we can add opacity of 0.3 and then set the radius of 20, 0 for X and 20 for Y. Alright, so now we're going to deal with the alert. Essentially what we want to do is when the user tap on login, it's going to show an alert automatically. First of all, we're going to create the states. So let's scroll back at the top. I'm going to add a new state. So state var show alert is equal to false. Let's add another one for the alert message. So state var alert message is equal to double quotes. We're going to put something went wrong. Okay, so let's scroll back to the button. So for your alert to work, you're going to have to create a modifier called .alert. And this is going to be for the button. So right after shadow, I'm going to add .alert. And we're going to use the option that says is presented. For the binding, I'm going to use $show alert. And for the content, I'm just going to delete that and add curly braces at the end. Now we're going to use the object called alert. So capital A, alert, parentheses. And we're going to select the one with title, message, and dismiss button. The title is a text element, so text parentheses quotes error. The message is also a text, so text parentheses. And inside the parentheses is self.alert message, which is the state that we just created. Then for the dismiss button, .default, we're going to select the one with the label, and inside the parentheses, we're going to use a text element as well, text parentheses quotes. I'm going to put OK in caps inside. Awesome, we're almost done. The last thing is just to deal with the action of the button. So when a user press on the button, we're going to set self.showAlert is equal to true. Now I'm going to resume Option Command and P. And so what should happen is when I tap on login, it's going to show my error with the message that I set. I also need to make sure that I dismiss the keyboard. So self.hide keyboard parentheses and not center the layout. So self.isFocus is equal to false. Perfect. So even if you have the keyboard enable and the centering of the layout, you click on login, it's just going to reset and show the alert. So now it's time to set up the Lottie animations, which is an animated asset, and it's really useful for loading animations, success animations, errors, onboarding, etc. So I'll show you how to use them in SwiftUI in the next session. I'll see you then. Hi there, welcome to section 50 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to implement animated assets in a Lottie format. So what is Lottie? Well, it's a new format of animated assets that is made in After Effects, which means the designer can create it from a different application, and just like a movie or a GIF, you can implement that in your app. So and animations like this one would be very complex to do in code. So instead, you download the JSON format and you implement that like a movie file or a GIF file. And on top of that, you have access to so many animations out there, free and paid, from a number of websites such as Lottie Files and Shape.so. These animations can be customized in terms of colors, and just like a video, you can play and pause any way you wish. It's a library created by Airbnb, and it's very easy to install. You just need to get the link from GitHub, and then we're gonna install that through Swift Package Manager. So before we start, you're gonna have to open the assets, and you're gonna find the Lottie folder where you're gonna find two files in JSON format, and you're going to drag and drop this next to, let's say, the assets catalog or work sound folder, and you're gonna make sure to copy items if needed, create groups, and add targets to design code, and finish. So you should see a folder like this one. Now to install the library, we're gonna go to File, Swift Packages, Add Package Dependency. This is where we're gonna enter the URL from GitHub. Click Next, and then leave it like this. So we're gonna get the latest version, and then Next. In the next screen, we have Lottie, so we're gonna finish this, and voila, it's installed. There is also another step that is necessary as of now because there's a compatibility issue. We're gonna need to go to the Xcode project and click on Design Code Target. We're gonna go to Build Settings, and from here, we're gonna search dead code. Where it says dead code stripping, we're gonna have to change this to no. This should solve an issue where the app crashes when you run the Lottie animation. It is possible that in the future it's going to be fixed and you won't need this step anymore. Once that's done, we can go ahead and create a Lottie view file right next to blur view. So right click on blur view and click on new file, SwiftUI view, Lottie view. Just like the blur view, we're gonna create a UI view representable so that we can use a normal Swift code. First of all, I'm going to delete the content. Then I'm gonna type struct Lottie view colon UI view representable curly braces. Now we need to specify what kind of object that we're dealing with. So let's use the suggestion from Swift. We're gonna click on Fix. It's going to ask for the type alias UI view type. We're gonna set to UI view. And then we're gonna do Command B to make sure that we're rebuilding and we have a different error, new errors. Now we're gonna click again, and let's click on Fix again. It's going to fill the missing two functions. One is make UI view, and the other one is update UI view. Let me just put this at the top and fix the spacing. Voila. One last thing is that we have to specify the context. So instead, we're going to type UI view representable context, then pointy brackets. Inside it, we're gonna put Lottie view. Make sure the L is in cap. And then we're gonna do the same for update UI view for context. So UI view representable context, pointy brackets, and we're gonna set the Lottie view inside. Now for the content of update UI view, we can just put nothing. And for make UI view, this is where we're gonna use normal Swift to render our Lottie file. First of all, let's set an empty UI view. So let view is equal to UI view parentheses, and we can use a frame. So the frame is going to be 0. We're basically creating a rectangle with a frame of 0 in terms of width, height, X and Y position. And then to make this function happy, since we're supposed to return a UI view, we're going to return the view that we just declared. Up until now, this is just filler code that has nothing to do with Lottie. Now it's time to use Lottie as the content. First, we're going to import Lottie. Then we're going to create an animation view from the library. So right after let view, I'm going to set let animation view camel case is equal to animation view with the A in cap, parentheses. Then I'm gonna set my animation file name. So let animation is equal to capital A animation dot name parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're gonna put quotes loading, which is the name of the file. So if you go to the folder, you're gonna find this is the name of the file. You don't need to put .json at the end. Then we're gonna specify the animation for the animation view that we have declared. So animation view in camel case, so the one that we declared, dot animation is equal to animation in lowercase. Now we're gonna make sure that our animation is going to scale properly. So animation view dot content mode is equal to dot scale aspect fit. Finally, we're gonna play it. So animation view dot play parentheses. Now we're gonna deal with constraints. Since this is different from SwiftUI, you have to specify the constraints so that it takes the full width and height of the container. So let's do animation view dot translate auto resizing mask into constraints. Just use the auto completion and then is equal to false. Before we set the constraints, we're going to have to insert our animation view into the view that we're returning. So right after, we're gonna do view dot add subview, and we're gonna type animation view. Finally, let's deal with the constraints. So ns layout constraint dot activate, we can just use the auto completion, and here we're gonna set the constraints. So let's press enter, and instead of ns layout constraint, I'm just gonna press enter, and then I'm going to put the width and height constraints. So animation view dot width anchor dot constraint, and here we're going to select the one that says equal to ns layout dimension. So instead of ns layout dimension, we're going to set view dot width anchor. For the multiplier, we don't need it. I'm gonna have to do the same for the height, so comma after that, and animate view dot height anchor dot constraint, use equal to, and instead of ns layout dimension, it's going to be view dot height anchor, and we can delete multiplier. Now you can see that this is a lot of code to just deal with the constraints, and this is the most basic constraints that you can have. So thanks to SwiftUI, we don't have to deal with this anymore. We can just use stacks and spacer and padding. The good news is that you can just use all of this code as is to run your Lottie file. We're just going to need to specify the asset name later on. So let's create a loading view where we're going to run our loading animation. Right on LottieView.swift, we're going to right click, new file, SwiftUI view, and loading view. And let's replace the text element by a Lottie view, parentheses, and then let's set the frame to width 200, height 200. Let's run this, Command Option P. We're going to need to play. And there you go, it's running the Lottie animation. Eventually, we're gonna have to deal with multiple Lottie files, which means that we should make the file name customizable. So we're gonna go back to Lottie view, and at the top, right after type alias, we're gonna type var file name of type string. And then we're gonna replace the quotes by the file name. Like this, we're making this customizable, so we can go back to loading view and then call again our Lottie view, but this time parentheses with the file name, instead of strings, quotes, loading. One important thing is that it is important that the Lottie view is inside a container, such as a VStack. This is essential when we're gonna run the loading view on top of the login view. Alright, so let's go to login view and implement that loading animation. First of all, we're going to need to set up a state for is loading. So state var is loading is equal to false. Then we're going to summon that loading view on top of our login view UI. So let's scroll at the very bottom, right after untap gesture and before the 3 ending curly braces. We're going to type if is loading, then, so curly braces, we're going to load loading view parentheses. Now we're going to go to the button action. So when the user press on login, which is right here, and after, I'm going to set self.isLoading is equal to true. So let me play this. And when I press, you can see that it's running, but we have the alert message at the same time. Before getting into an API call, we can fake it by using a delay. So what we're going to do here, we're going to set dispatch queue.main.async after, and it's going to be a dispatch time. So for deadline, we're going to put .now parentheses plus 2, so 2 seconds. And then execute, we're going to press enter. And then we're going to put self.isLoading is equal to false. Also, we're going to move show alert right after the 2 seconds. Cool, so let's see the result of our work today. We're going to press login, and you can see the loading animation shows, and after 2 seconds, the loading disappears and the alert pops up. We've learned a powerful technique today you're going to be able to use from thousands of Lottie animations out there. In the next session, we're going to learn how to create a success sequence animation using Lottie when the user has successfully signed in. So I hope to see you in the next session. Welcome to section 51 of my SwiftUI course. Before we get into Firebase in the next session, we're going to create a very simple success screen using Lottie animation paired with sequence animation using delay. First of all, let's create the success screen. So we're going to go to loading view, right click on it, new file, SwiftUI view, and then we're going to name it success view. We're going to start with the title. So here, instead of the text here, I'm going to put logging you triple dots. Let me just resume. And then I'm going to set the font. So dot font, dot title, and I'm going to set it to dot bold as well. Then I'm going to put a Lottie animation below it. So first of all, I'm going to have to put this inside a VStack. And right after the text, I'm going to set Lottie view, parentheses, the file name, quotes, is going to be success. For this Lottie view, I'm going to set dot frame, the width to 300, the height to 300. So just like the loading animation, I'm going to put this on top of the login view, or any view for that matter. And I'm going to wrap this inside a container with a background. And so I'm gonna go to the VStack and add a background modifier with a blur view. The blur view is going to have a style of system material, and we're gonna give it big rounded corners using dot clip shape, rounded rectangle parentheses, corner radius and style, 34 corner radius, and the style is dot continuous. Then we're going to add a shadow, so dot shadow. Using more options, the color is going to be color.black, dot opacity, set it to 0.2. Radius is going to be 30, x 0, y 30. Let me add a little bit of padding for this title, so I'm gonna do that before the background modifier, dot padding, dot top, comma 30. Great, so now we're gonna deal with a simple start animation. So let's start by adding a state. state var show is equal to false. Then we're going to activate this using the onAppear event. So onAppear, instead of parentheses, we're going to use curly braces. Self.show is equal to true. What this means is that as soon as we see the VStack, then we're going to start the animation. We can start with a very simple scale effect. So dot scale effect, we're going to say show question mark, and we're going to set it to 1, otherwise 0.5 by default. Then we're going to add the animation modifier. So animation, we're going to do dot spring. We're going to use the response damping and blend. So 0.5, 0.6, and then 0. So if we resume and then play, we should see a very simple card that pops up from a scale of 0.5. Next, we can make the title appear using opacity, and then the Lottie animation fade in afterwards. So let's go to the title and add dot opacity, show question mark 1, otherwise 0. We're gonna do the same for the Lottie view, so we can just copy and paste that same modifier. For the sequence animation, we're going to be specific about the animation, so dot animation. We're gonna need the value type because we're gonna add the delay as well, so animation with capital A, dot linear with duration. The duration is going to be 1, and at the end of the parentheses, we're going to add a dot delay to 0.2. Then we can copy this animation modifier and apply that to Lottie view as well. For the Lottie view, we're gonna do delay of 0.4 instead. So now you can see that the title appears first and then the Lottie view after. Of course, you can change the values if you want to. Another thing that's useful to know when you test animations is that instead of just stop and play all the time, you can just add a space and then delete the space. It's going to refresh the preview. Now we're ready to implement this in the login view. So let's go ahead and go to the login view.swift. I'm going to add a new state. So state var is success is equal to false. Then I'm going to make sure to show it if is success is true. So I'm going to scroll down right after is loading. I'm going to add another if. So if is success, curly braces, success view parentheses. Now let's scroll up a little bit. We're gonna find the button action. Let me explain this again. So when I tap on login, it's going to show the loading. It's going to reset the screen and hide the keyboard. And then we're doing a fake API call by simply using a delay of 2 seconds. At the end, it's going to hide the loading and show the alert. Now instead of showing the alert, we're simply going to show the success screen. So I'm going to comment the alert and do self.isSuccess is equal to true. Great, so now I'm going to resume and then play the login view. Let's tap on login. So the loading appears and then after 2 seconds, it shows the success view. When you have a modal like that, it would be nice to have a dim background. We can easily fix that by going to the success view. And then for the VStack container, we're going to add a background. Now, what is interesting about this is that we already have a background, and then we're setting the clip shape and the drop shadow. On top of that, we have the animations going on, and we don't really want to apply these animation values for the background as well. So you have two options. One is to create another container such as a VStack, or you can simply add more modifiers. So let's do that. We're going to create the frame for the full background. So max width dot infinity, max height dot infinity. Then we're going to add the background color, so dot background color dot black dot opacity at 0.5. And then we're going to ignore the save area. So let's do dot edge ignore save area dot all. So what is interesting about this is that there's no animation to the background, so there's no fade in. And that might be a little bit weird when we're going to apply that on top of the login view, for example. Maybe we want to have a fade in animation. So let's try to use the show state, show question mark set to 0.5, otherwise set to 0. But you can see that there's no transition. And you can see that the animation modifier is not being applied to this background. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because imagine if you put the frame and the background modifiers before, let's say, scale effect. You're gonna see that it's weird because we are animating the background as well, and it has a bouncing effect that we don't want. So this is actually a good thing, because now I can add another animation modifier using a different timing. So dot linear, for example, with a duration of 0.5. And you can see it's very smooth. Even if I put it to 5 seconds, for example, everything appears and then the background appears later, and that can create very interesting effects. So let me put it back to 0.5 and let's go back to the login view. Now, before we end this, I just want to show two things. The first thing is this button action can get pretty crazy, especially when we're gonna deal with Firebase next. So a good practice is to create a function. So let me cut the content, so Command X. I'm going to do self.login, which is the name of the function, parentheses, and it does not exist yet, which is why I'm going to create it now. So let me scroll to the top, and right before func hide keyboard, I'm going to create another function, func login, parentheses, curly braces, and then I'm going to paste all of that code. Let's fix the indentation, selecting Control I. Let me just fix this comment space. And so it's a good practice to separate the application logic from the layout code, especially since login has to do with user accounts and authentication. It typically has a lot of code involved. We should also dismiss the success screen after, let's say, 2 seconds. So right here after self.isSuccess is equal to true, we can put dispatch queue.main.sync after with dispatch time. So .now parentheses +2, tab enter, and self.isSuccess is equal to false. So let's resume the simulator, and then you click on login. Now we have the loading, shows the animation, and after 2 seconds, it disappears. The last thing I want to show you is that you can refactor any name in your project by using a really good feature called refactor in Xcode. So for example, I have this boolean called isSuccess, and maybe I want to call it isSuccessful, which sounds better. So what I can do is right click on the selected text, and you're going to find refactor, then rename. And voila, you have 4 instances, and we can just rename all of them at the same time, like this. When you're done, click rename, and everything should be updated. It seems that after I use that feature, the canvas stopped showing. So what you can do here is go to this button on the top right and click on canvas. It's going to show it back. You're going to have to resume though. So that's what I wanted to show you today. I try to always incorporate new techniques as we build new stuff. I hope you like it. In the next session, we're going to get into Firebase, finally. I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome to section 52 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to implement Firebase with SwiftUI. So the first thing you need to do is to sign in with your Google account. In this section, I link to this guide where you're going to learn step by step what you need to do in order to install Firebase. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. First of all, we're going to need Xcode and CocoaPods, which is a package manager that has been around for way longer than the Swift package manager, and it supports a lot more libraries, such as Firebase. So we're definitely gonna get back to this. First, we're gonna need to sign into Firebase, and then create a Firebase project. So if you open on the plus sign here, there's a link to the Firebase console, and if you click here, this is where you're gonna see all of your Firebase projects. I'm gonna go ahead and create a project. I'm going to name it Design Code-SwiftUI Course. And feel free to use whatever name suits you. Then I'm gonna click next, next again. If you happen to have Google Analytics, you can attach it to one of your accounts. I'm gonna select design code and then create project. This is going to take a little bit of time, but when it's done, you can click on continue, and this is your Firebase dashboard. Next, we're gonna click on the settings icon. And here we're gonna go to project settings. Then we're gonna set up an iOS app. So we're gonna click on the iOS icon. For the iOS bundle ID, it is very important that you go to Xcode and then you go to project settings. Here you're gonna find the bundle identifier. So we're gonna copy this, make sure to be in general and target design code. And then we're going to paste that bundle ID. Next, we're gonna register app. And then it's telling you to download the Google Service info.plis and to install that to your Xcode project. So we're gonna go back to Xcode and find exactly that file. I'm going to drag and drop that file, let's say right after Lottie. And make sure to select destination copy items if needed, create groups, and add to targets design code. So you should see a file like this. And now back to the Firebase console, I'm gonna click on next. So now it's asking me to install CocoaPods, and it has a website. We're gonna click on it. We have to install CocoaPods, and the command to install it has to be done using the terminal. So we're gonna copy this from sudo until CocoaPods, and then we're gonna open the terminal. The terminal is an application that is available on every Mac, and here we're going to paste that command, and then we're gonna press enter. It's going to ask for your password. This is going to be your Mac password, and after entering it, you're gonna press enter. It's going to install CocoaPods. After a few minutes, it's going to finish installing, and this is where we're gonna go to our project and install to our project. So we're gonna type cd, which means that we're gonna jump to this folder, and then using your Finder, you're gonna go ahead and search for that folder where you created your Xcode project. It's probably gonna be in downloads or desktop, and then the name of the Xcode project. So I'm gonna drag and drop this to terminal, and it's going to autocomplete the name and the path to my Xcode project, and then press enter. Afterwards, you're gonna have to type pod init. This is going to initialize CocoaPods in your project. When it's done, it's going to create a pod file where you can put the names of the libraries that you're going to use. So I'm going to type open pod file with capital P, enter. So this is going to open the file in a text format. And then if you come back to the configuration from your Firebase console, you're gonna see that we're here. After pod init, it's asking you to add this text, but this is not complete. It's only going to add Firebase Analytics. We're gonna need more than this. We're actually gonna go to the original guide, and let's see, we did step 1, step 2, and then step 3, which is the info list, and then now we're at step 4, right after pod init. So the text that we need to add is here. You can copy to clipboard, and then back to that text file, we're going to put that right after where it says pods for design code, enter, and then paste the content. So we're gonna use analytics, auth, which is what we're gonna learn today, and Firestore is for database. So auth is just for login, and Firestore is for all the rest of the data. But today we're only going to cover authentication. Once you're done, make sure to save it, so Command S, and then we can close the file. Back to the terminal, we're going to do one last command, which is pod install, enter. Again, this is going to take a few minutes, but once you're done, we're going to type open dot enter. This is going to open this folder directly to your Finder. Now this is the part that is key about CocoaPods, is that from now on, you're gonna have to open the XC workspace instead. So let's go back to Xcode. We're gonna have to close this. So Command W, and back to our Finder, we're going to double click the XC workspace file. When it's open, you're gonna see the Swift package dependencies on the left, and also design code, as well as the pods. Let's go back to design code. We're gonna open the design code folder, And that's exactly where we left off. Back to the setup guide, there's just one final step, which is to initialize Firebase in the app. So we're gonna go to UI application delegate. In our SwiftUI app, that's actually the app delegate file. And we're gonna have to import Firebase and then configure it inside did finish launching with options. So let's do exactly that. I'm going to copy these 2 lines of code. So copy. Then in Xcode, I'm gonna go to app delegate. I'm gonna go ahead and import Firebase. Then I'm gonna find did finish launching with options, and before return true. So right here, I'm going to paste the 2 lines of code. So that's it. You're ready to use Firebase in your app. I know this is a lot of step, and I also know that CocoaPods definitely add a level of complexity that most beginners are not used to. But please keep in mind that this technique is extremely powerful. It's gonna give you access to not just Firebase, but thousands of libraries out there that have been created over the years before SwiftUI came along. Alright, so remember our iOS setup from the Firebase console? Well, let's finish that. We're gonna go here at step 3, we're gonna click next. And this step is already taken care of, which was to configure Firebase in the app delegate. Let's run next again. So this 5th step is to verify if it is installed correctly. So we can go to Xcode, for example, and then we can run on the iOS simulator. So after you finish building the app and you wait a few minutes, you're gonna see that it's gonna say congratulations, Firebase has been added. Let's click on continue to console, and now we can start using Firebase authentication. On the left side, I'm going to click authentication, and here I'm gonna set up the sign-in method. I'll go with the email password, so click on it and make sure to enable the first one and not the second one, because the second one is for passwordless, which is known as the magic link. So let's go ahead and click save. And now I'm gonna go to the tabs. On the left side, it says users. I'm gonna click on it. Usually from the app, you have the option to sign up, but in this section, we're only going to deal with login. So we're gonna click on add user, and then we're going to manually create a dummy account to test the login. So let's put test@email.com. For the password, it's going to be 123456. And then we're gonna click on add user. Great, so now that the database part is done and configured, we can go to the login view, and let me just hide the inspector as well as the navigator. And from here, let's import Firebase first. Then let's scroll to the login function, and this is where we're going to make a Firebase call. Let me do that after the dispatch queue. So remember that we used this to fake an API call. Well, now we're gonna do the real thing. So after that, I'm going to type auth with a capital A, and this is using the Firebase library dot auth parentheses dot sign in. And here we have a bunch of options. The one that we're gonna use is the one with email, password, and completion. So let's select that one and double click. For the email, it's simple. We're gonna use the states. So email, password, completion, we're gonna press enter. Now it's going to return the data and the error. So for the data, we're gonna call it result. For the error, error. So from here, there are 2 things that can happen. One, there's an error. Second, it's successful. Let's deal with the error first. We're going to type if error is not equal to nil, curly braces. Then we're gonna change the alert message. So self.alert message, and then we're gonna use the error data that we're receiving from the API call dot localized description. So this has to be a string, so we're gonna set a fallback, so question mark, double quotes. This is necessary when you have an optional and you might get a response that is nil. So we're almost ready to test this. And right now we can't run both the API call and the fake call. So we're gonna have to move the code to the API call. First of all, we're gonna move the line that says hide the loading animation. We're gonna move that right after the API call. Then we're gonna uncomment the line that says show the alert, and we're going to move that for the condition where there's an error. Then we're going to create an else statement. So when there's no error, which means if it's successful, we're going to copy and paste the cell is successful is equal to true, which means show the success screen, and also the 2 seconds delay to hide the success screen. Let's not forget to delete the dispatch queue that is empty now. Let's test our app. We're going to do Option Command NP. I'm going to press play. So unfortunately, you cannot test Firebase with the preview. If you click on login, it's just going to be a blank screen. What you're going to need to do is to test on your iOS simulator. Now, once you're running the app, you click on login. It's going to give you the error message, which means that it works. Let's try with the email. So test@email.com. Click login. Again, we don't have a password. Let's try with a password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Login, and boom, we have the loading. It's a bit fast, and then it shows the success screen. After 2 seconds, it hides the success screen. One small detail that we can add is just to reset these fields. So that's easy. We can just do self.email is equal to nothing and self.password is equal to nothing. And we're doing this after we're hiding the success screen. I'm going to press Command R to run the app again. I'm going to put the password first, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, log in. And the error is good because it tells me that the email is not correct. Let's correct that. So test@email.com, login. Then the login is successful and we reset the fields. And here I'm not sure why there's a little glitch where the placeholder is not appearing. But from what I've seen, it works on the device. And anyways, we're supposed to hide the screen after login. In the next session, we're going to learn about environment objects, which is really good for data that should be shared across the entire app. For example, when the user logs in, we want to keep that data consistent across the app and easily get it from anywhere, so that you can either show the login screen, or once logged in, you're supposed to show the avatar and the account menu. I'll teach that in the next session. I'll see you then. Hi, and welcome to section 53 of my SwiftUI course. Now that we have done an API call to Firebase and then logged in as a result, we should save that information and make it accessible using environment objects. So let me create a document where we're going to store that. Let's do Command O and right click on Login View, New File, SwiftUI View. Let's name this User Store and then Create. So this is almost exactly like Combine, except that we're going to make it available from an app level. So let's delete everything except import SwiftUI. We're going to import Combine. Then I'm going to create class user store colon observable object curly braces, enter. We're going to publish two variables. So publish var is logged is equal to false. This is going to allow me to show the avatar or not, to show the menu or not. And then I'm going to create another one. So published var show login is equal to false. And this one is useful for showing or hiding the login screen. Now we're going to make it available through the entire app. So we're going to go to scene delegate, and roughly on line 28, you're going to find content view. And after content view, before the end of the parentheses, I'm going to type dot environment object parentheses, and inside the parentheses I'm going to put user store parentheses. This is from the file that we just created. Make sure to not get lost in the parentheses. We have user store, environment object, and UI hosting controller. Now we're going to go to home.swift. I'm going to click at the breadcrumb menu next to home.swift where it says no selection. I'm going to find avatar view. So let me resume this and sort of explain from a UI perspective. The avatar view is what controls the avatar, and what I want to do is, if I'm not logged in, it's going to show an icon instead of an avatar. So to do that, I'm going to need to know if the user is logged in or not. I'm going to add a line after binding and put environment object var user of type user store. So now I have information about the user and I can use that to show different buttons. So I can command click on the button, and then there's an option that's called make conditional. It creates two cases. One is true, so therefore show the avatar, else we're going to show something else. And on top of that, it created the container for me, which is essential in SwiftUI. So for the true condition, I'm going to put user dot is logged. Else, if the user is not logged, I'm going to show a button with an icon. Since it's very similar to the avatar, I can just copy this button and paste it in the else statement. If you resume your preview, you will get an error, and that's because the preview for home previews also needs the environment object. So we're going to have to add an extra line dot environment object user store parentheses. While we're here, let me just set the indentation, and also I'm going to comment the color scheme and the size category. So scrolling back down, I'm going to put an icon instead of the avatar. Let's type system name person. For the rest of the styling, I can basically use the same as the bell icon, which can be found in home view, or you can take it from the text content. And basically at the first button in home view, you're going to find the shadow, the background, as well as the foreground. So I'm going to copy these modifiers. Going back to home, I'm going to replace all of those modifiers. Great. As you can see, when you're logged in, it's going to show the avatar, and when you're not, it's going to show this button with the person icon. One last thing is to make the action different. Remember that user has two states. One is logged and the other one is show login. So we can exactly do that. User.showLogin.toggle. Now I'm going to scroll back at the very top, and this is where we control the UI for the whole app. So I'm going to make sure that I can show the login screen as well. First of all, I'm going to include the environment object. So environment object var user of type user store. And then I'm going to scroll a little bit where I can find if show content. And I'm going to add an if statement right before that. So if user.showLogin curly braces login view parentheses. So let's resume and play this. And what should happen here is when I press on the person icon, it should show me the login view. So I'm going to press on it and voila. I'm just missing a close button so I can close this login. So what I'm going to do here is to put the login view inside a Z-stack. First of all, it's going to be a V-stack. I'm going to change that into a Z-stack. And then after the login view, I'm going to copy the close button. So I'm going to paste that after the login view. Then I'm going to add a little bit of padding. I'm also going to add a tap gesture. So on tap gesture, then type self.user show login is equal to false. Now this should allow me to open the login screen and then to close the login screen. Next, I want to make sure that when I log in, I'm going to change the state of the user. So let's head to login view and let's use the environment object. So environment object var user of type user store. So what I'm going to do here is for the login function, when it is successful, I'm going to change the user state. So self.user.isLogged is equal to true. And finally, I'm going to hide the login screen. So after the 2 seconds that we're showing the success screen, I want to hide the login screen. So I'm going to set self.user.showLogin is equal to false. And that's basically it. Maybe one last thing is to put back the animations for the cover view. So I'm going to jump to the cover view. I'm going to find the animation that was disabled. So uncomment it, and I'm going to comment the animation nil. Let me just put back the scene delegate to home, and then we can test the app. So after running the app, you can see that when I'm not logged in, I'm seeing this person icon, and when I click on it, it's gonna go to the login screen. And usual login experience, I'm going to set the email. So test@email.com, 1 2 3 4 5 6, login, it logs me in, and then it hides the login screen, and then I get to see the avatar, and at this point I can show the menu. I think this is pretty awesome. In the next session, I want to make this persistent, which means that if you close the app, you're still going to be logged in. So I'll see you in the next session. Hello and welcome. This is section 54 of my SwiftUI course, and we're going to learn about user defaults. So after I try to log in, we see the success screen, and then I see my avatar. But then when I close the app and I open the app again, then the data is lost, so I have to log in again, and that is definitely not optimal. So what we need to do is to save this information and make it persistent using user defaults. Back to Xcode, we're gonna go to the user store.swift, and then we're gonna change the default to something that is going to pull the information from user defaults. User defaults can be any sort of data, so we're gonna have to be specific here with this variable. So let me delete after the equal sign, and right after is logged, colon is going to be of type Boolean, then equal user defaults with capital U dot standard dot, and here you can see that we can use many types of data, such as an array, a boolean, a double, float, integer, etc. In this case, we're going to use boolean, and then it's asking for a key. So any data that you're storing needs to have a unique key. If you've done web development, this is very similar to cookies. So we're going to set the string, double quotes, is logged. And then after the parentheses, we're going to set curly braces, did set camel case, curly braces again. And here we're going to make sure that when the application loads, we're going to pull any data that has already been stored using user defaults for is logged. So user defaults dot standard dot set. Then we're going to use value bool for key string. For the value, we're going to set self.isLogged, self meaning the user store is logged. And then we're getting specifically the key is logged. So that's basically it in terms of detecting the persistent data from user defaults, and it's already attached to our state. In other words, as long as the data exists in user defaults, we're going to show the avatar instead of the person icon. Now we just need to write to user defaults after the login. So we're gonna go to loginview.swift, and I'm gonna go and find the login function, which is right here. Now on top of setting self.userisLogged is equal to true, I'm going to store to user defaults. So user defaults dot standard dot set for boolean for key, and I'm gonna set this to true. The key is going to be is logged. That's it. Now we can test it. So what's going to happen here is that as soon as I log in, it's going to save the state to user defaults, which means that it's going to be persistent. Let's go ahead and put the info, log in, and so the state is working fine. I just need to close the app and open again, and voila, it saved my login state. Yep, that's how simple it is to make your data persistent in SwiftUI. Now we're gonna create a logout, which means we're gonna go to menu view where we have the option. So we have account, billing sign out. We're going to add a tap gesture to the sign out button. So .tap gesture. Then we can write to user defaults. So user defaults .standard .set. Using the boolean is going to be false. The key is logged. This is great, but that's not enough. We also need to change the environment object. So let me scroll to the top and I'm going to add environment object var user of type user store. Then I'm gonna go back to my gesture and I'm going to set the environment object. So self.user.isLogged is equal to false. By the way, if you want to make the environment object work in the preview, you're gonna need to add it to the preview code. So for example, I click play and I click sign out, it's just gonna go blank. So let me go to the menu previews. And here I'm going to add .environment object and user store parentheses. So now when I click on sign out, it's fine. It's not gonna go blank. So this part is necessary and it can actually make your preview stop depending on how you use your environment object. So for example, if you were to use an if statement using the environment object, then the preview might not work at all without this. There's just one last thing that I want to do is to be able to close this after I click on sign out. If you go to home and you scroll down a little bit to find the menu view, you're gonna see that I can only close the menu during untap or when I drag it for more than 50 points, and then it's going to close the menu. But what I want to do is to also be able to close it when I click on sign out. So I'm going to need to create the binding. Let me go back to menu view. I'm going to create the binding. So after environment object, binding var show profile of type boolean. So because I don't have a default value for my variable show profile, I'm going to have to set it to the menu previews as well. So let me add the missing value, show profile. The binding is going to be .constant, set to true. Then I'm going to change the state during the tap gesture. So for on tap gesture, I'm going to add self.showProfile is equal to false. Finally, since this component now has a binding, I'm going to head back to home, and this is where I'm going to have to put the missing value. Let's type show profile. For the binding, it's going to be $show profile. All right, so let's do one final test, Command R. Already you can see that it remembers that I logged in, and now when I click on the avatar, it's going to show the menu, and when I click on sign out, it's going to hide and it logs me out. Even if I go back to Xcode and build again, you're gonna see that it remembers that I'm logged out. Voila. That's all for the login experience. In the next session, we're going to adapt our entire app for the iPad. I'll see you in the next session. Hi, and welcome to section 55 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to adapt our app for the iPad. And we're also going to make sure that it listens to screen orientation change, as well as slide over, which lets you have multiple apps in the same screen. And that's a big challenge because the user can resize dynamically. So because of that, if your app has to adapt for the iPad, you have to accommodate very small screens, such as the old iPhone SE, which has a width of 320. I'm going to explain more in detail when we get there, but first of all, let's switch to homeview.swift. So because we're using the environment object, I'm going to have to include that in the preview. So let's switch to homeview_previews. Then after homeview, we're gonna add .environmentObject user store parentheses. Now let's go back to the top, and before moving on, let's test this on the iPad. So I'm gonna go to devices and I'm going to switch to iPad Pro 11 inch. Now, the first issue that we see here is that the card is too wide, and that's an easy fix. The second issue is the angle of the 3D here. Again, that's another easy fix. But the most important issue is not seen here. We actually have to see it in a simulator or on the device. So let's run the app. So Command R. And here, if you change the orientation of the screen by doing Command left arrow or right arrow, you're gonna see that on the landscape mode, we have the screen size that is not correct. And that happens when you're trying to detect the screen size and use that number for animations or for layout, and it's pretty static. It's even more obvious when you use slide over. So you can swipe from the bottom and then long press drag, put another app to the right. You're gonna see that the layout does not adapt well, and these are the resolutions. So you can have split screen like that, or have a width of 375. And if you put it to portrait mode, you're gonna see that this width here is 320. Most designers will be quick to judge and say that they don't have to accommodate for the older screens, such as the old iPhone SE with a width of 320. Well, that is wrong, because in slide over, this resolution is still relevant. Now let's go back and see why we try to detect the screen size. I'm going to scroll a little bit, and you can see I'm using the screen value. So this is great for prototyping, but if you have to adapt for the iPad, for slide over, or for screen orientation change between portrait and landscape, you should be using Geometry Reader instead. And to use that, we're gonna go back to the very top, so home view, and we're gonna find the body. We're going to put the Geometry Reader at the root level, so wrapping even the scroll view. So let's command click scroll view and then embed in, let's say, VStack. Instead of VStack, we're going to change it to Geometry Reader, and we're going to name the value bounds in. And anytime that you do that, you're going to have to add self to every single value, which is a very good practice anyways. So we're going to add self for each value that gives us an error until we don't have any more error. So if you scroll down a little bit, you're gonna find section view, and this is where we use screen.width, and also we're using screen.width for the frame. And the reason why we did this is because we wanted to avoid that extra animation when you're loading the UI. So instead of using a static value, we're going to use Geometry Reader, which is dynamic. So bounds.size.width. And the same for section view, bounds.size.width. Let me run this again by doing Command R, and voila, you can see that thanks to Geometry Reader, I'm always getting the correct size. This is really cool. Traditionally, we would have to listen to the screen orientation change, and then we would have to resize the screen. But Geometry Reader makes it all dynamic, and we didn't have to do any of that listening. It does it for us. Now let's test the other screens, such as the content view. And this is where we see that the layout needs a lot of work, because when we started this, we did not anticipate that we needed to adapt for a width of 320. And also we hard-coded some values. So for example, this bottom card is supposed to be hidden, and when it's in full screen mode, it's supposed to be in the middle of the screen. So let's apply the second important technique, which is the max width. We're gonna go to content view. I'm gonna scroll up a little bit, switch to content view.swift, and then I'm going to resume. If the screen is too big here, we can always resize it to 50%. And we're gonna take a look at the bottom card. Let's scroll down a little bit to find bottom card view. And here you can see that we have hard-coded these numbers. So the offset when it's hidden, so we're setting it to 1000, and when it's active, we're setting it to 360. We shouldn't use hard-coded numbers, which means that we should be using Geometry Reader. Now, we don't need to set the Geometry Reader at the root level. In this case, because we're using a bottom card view and it's taking the full screen, we are essentially getting the screen size because Geometry Reader gets the size of the parent. So I'm going to command click bottom card view, embed in VStack, set it to Geometry Reader. Then I'm gonna get a value called bounds in. As a result, I'm going to have to add self everywhere. So let's apply the suggestions. Then we're gonna replace 1000 by the screen height. So bounds.size.height. But now we're running into a second problem, which is that the screen height is within the save area. So there's an easy fix for this, which is let's go to the end of Geometry Reader. By the way, there's a trick here. You can double click after the curly braces and it's gonna find the end of that curly braces. So we're gonna add ignore self area dot all. And voila, this solves our problem. There's also another way to fix this, because using ignore save area on a parent container can affect your content. We can detect the size of the status bar as well as the home indicator. First of all, let me just put this in another line, and I'm going to comment this because I don't want to use both techniques at the same time. So I'm gonna go back here where it says bounds.size.height. I'm going to do plus bounds.saveArea insets, camel case. Make sure to write it correctly, and dot top. We should also add the bottom part. So plus bounds.saveArea insets dot bottom. Now this is actually really powerful. Why? Because we are essentially detecting the status bar size and the home indicator using Geometry Reader. And you can imagine you can do so many cool things about this by adding, let's say, a background to the status bar, animating it, or also to the home indicator area. Next, we're going to change 360 by half of the height of the screen. So it's going to be bounds.size.height / so divided by 2. Great, so now we can test this. I'm going to click on play and voila. Now I want to talk about the width for the content. Since on the iPad we can have really big screen, especially in landscape mode, the text can be too long to read. So in design, you should never have text that is too long to read, have more than 90 characters per line, which is why we always want to have the text to wrap inside a certain size of a container. And here we have some really good references. So we have the small modal box, the medium size, and the bigger size. So I was really curious to see what is the maximum size for the content that Apple has in terms of the box. And here you can find that if I create a rectangle, the width happens to be roughly 712. Let me zoom in just to make sure that we are precise here. So that's the number that we get. Back to Xcode, we know that the smallest size of the iPad is 1024 by 768, which means that this width of this container here is too large. So we need to limit the width of this container. We're gonna command click the bottom card view, jump to definition, and at the very end, where it says max width infinity, we're going to set it to 712. If we test this, we're going to see that the size is correct, but it's not centering properly, and that's because Geometry Reader doesn't align child elements the same way as a stack. So we're going to have to either create a parent container for this UI, or we can add a new frame. So dot frame after shadow, we're going to set max width to dot infinity. So now this should be aligning properly, and let's test that in the simulator. So you can see that the UI does a really good job at adapting. Specifically this one, if I set it to landscape, you can see that it has a max width. So if it's more or less, it's going to adapt based on the max width. Now back to portrait, we haven't adapted yet for a screen of 320, so let's do that. A common mistake that people make is to use images, and these images are not resizable and they are too big for the screen, and they're going to push the whole content. First of all, it would be good to be able to preview that specific small size. So we're gonna go ahead and switch to the content view previews. And here what we can do is to create a fixed size preview. So dot preview layout dot fixed, using a width of 320 and a height of 667. This is the size of the old iPhone SE. Let me just stop the preview to update it. This is helpful Now I'm going to switch to title view. So I'm going to find that from my menu. And you can find here that the image is bigger than the screen. So what I can do here is to use .resizable. And then let's make sure to set the aspect ratio to content mode .fit. And I want to make sure that my image does not go super big. So I can do .frame and set a max width of 375. So this is still too big, and that's because of the cards, not because of the image, because I'm using a max width. So let's go ahead and switch to the cards. I'm gonna go to the very top. Then I'm gonna scroll a little bit, and you can see here I'm not using a max width, and I should be doing that. So I'm going to set, instead of width, to max width. But here I cannot mix max width and height, so I'm gonna have to put height in another frame. So let me just cut this part, remove the comma, and add .frame and paste that height. Let me do the same for the other cards, but this time I'm going to copy the entire frame modifier, and I'm going to go to the other card, this time back card view again, and I'm gonna set to max width, remove height with a comma, and then paste the frame height. Let's do one last one for the card view. Remove the height, set max width, and then paste the frame modifier with a height. So now you can see that our UI is looking great on a small phone, and we can test that on the simulator. So it's working perfectly with this super small screen size. If you make it slightly bigger, it's going to center. One tiny thing we can fix here is there's an issue with the 3D transform on orientation change. I'm not sure if this is temporary, but you can easily fix this by disabling the 3D transform. So going back to Xcode, we can just comment a rotation 3D effect for both back card view. Alright, so today we learned some really important techniques such as using Geometry Reader to detect the screen size, but also using max width to ensure that our content does not exceed a certain size. Now you can see that the layout adapts really well thanks to Geometry Reader, but also it listens to screen orientation change, and on top of that, we've managed to adapt our UI to a super small screen such as the old iPhone SE. And now the layout does a beautiful job at adapting dynamically as the user resizes the screen. And we're not done. There are more things to fix, such as the corner radius. We also want to make sure that the layout works on a screen that does not have a notch, such as the non-Pro iPad, as well as the new iPhone SE. So I look forward to teach you that in the next session. See you then.